Bueno, Pablo, sin demasiada espera, entonces comenzamos. Pobre, ingresas y ya comenzamos. Bueno, buenos días a todos.
Buenos
¿Cómo
días.
les va? Bueno, nos
Buenos días.
ha sido hoy para celebrar, la tesis, la defensa de tesis de la alumna Paula Alejandra Camuso. Se encuentran hoy presentes la secretaria de posgrado, doctora Graciela Ferrero, personal no docente de oficialía, Maíster Ángela Castro, y desde tecnología nos acompaña también Víctor Gómez para asistirnos ante cualquier dificultad que podamos tener. Bueno, acá está Paula y los miembros del tribunal, Yamina Gaba, Pablo Requena y Natalia Dalla Costa, y también se encuentra presente la directora de tesis de Paula, la magíster María Elisa Romano. Bueno, vamos a comenzar entonces. Yo necesitaría que acreditáramos identidad mostrando el DNI tanto de la tesista como de los miembros del tribunal. Entonces, Paula, si pudieras acercar tu DNI a la cámara.
Sí, ¿me podrían decir si lo pueden ver correctamente?
Perfecto, muchísimas gracias. Yamina.
Sí.
Si puede estar un poquitín más cerca.
¿Más cerca?
Sí, ahí lo vemos.
Bueno.
Bien. Gracias. Natalia.
Sí, no sé si ahí se ve.
Sí.
Ahí, perfecto, muchas gracias. Y Pablo, ¿estás ahí? Y a la cámara, por favor. Se ve medio borroso. Vamos a decir. Ahí está.
Ahí está. Ahí está.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias entonces. Bueno, entonces, como les envié en el mail anterior para la organización, primero Paula va a comenzar con su presentación y después va a haber un momento de preguntas. El título de algo que no dije anteriormente, que dada la singularidad del evento, todo se va a desarrollar en español, queda grabado, y la presentación de Paula, y por supuesto que la participación del jurado al momento de hacer preguntas o hacer alguna valoración o comentario, se va a llevar adelante en inglés, por supuesto, pero toda esta cuestión inicial la llevamos adelante en español. Bueno, el título de la tesis, entonces, es la relación entre la lectura y la escritura en un estudio de caso múltiple en la Universidad Nacional de Villa María, una naturaleza transversal. Paula, entonces, te damos la palabra. Tenés aproximadamente 40-45 minutos para desarrollar los principales hallazgos de tu investigación.
Bien, perfecto. Paso entonces a compartir pantalla. Ahora yo dejo de verlos, por los que si me pudieran decir si pueden visualizar la presentación, les agradecería antes de comenzar.
Sí, Paula, sí podemos.
Well, before I start, I would like to express my appreciation to my advisor, María Elisa Romano, who has guided me and assisted me throughout this journey of writing this thesis. Thank you very much for your time, knowledge, and encouragement. I would also like to express my thanks to the members of the thesis examination committee whose observations and suggestions have added I would say, quality to this work. And last but not least, I am also grateful to Florencia Jimenez, the director of the SMA. Thank you for every email, your concern, and your good disposition. Well, the title of my thesis is The Reading-Writing Relationship in a Multiple Case Study at Universidad Nacional de Villa María, a Transverse Nature. This presentation is organized into 5 sections, which summarize the 5 chapters of my thesis: introduction, theoretical framework, methodology, results and discussion, and conclusion. I will devote most of the time to address some of the observations that the thesis examination committee made, and to the last 2 sections. In relation to the introduction, I would like to start with a statement of the problem, so as to explain how the idea of this research germinated. I'm going to take some time so as to present the problem in a clearer way, based on the observation of one of the members of the thesis examination committee. As most research, this study originated in an attempt to solve a problem that occurs in practice. In fact, my interest in the reading-writing relationship stemmed from my concern over my English language for students' difficulties in writing academic essays, particularly summary analysis essays. But it was in the context of one of the seminars of SMA that I became familiar with the line of research that focuses on the reading-writing linkage. This led me to reconsider my own teaching practices and to think in terms of how to tackle this issue. Undoubtedly, teachers and researchers notice the perennial problem that students are confronted with when they are involved in literacy practices. The first step was to think in terms of possible remedial actions, and then to carry out a review of the literature, which I will then explain. But I would say that my purpose or my motivation in conducting this research is pedagogically driven. With respect to the literature, I organized it into 4 groups. I will only refer to the conclusions I arrive at after analyzing the studies as groups. Within the first group, I included studies that focus on students' writing performance. In this case, the literature has consistently shown that both non-native English speakers and native English speakers confront problems when involved in reading to write tasks. One major issue is the misuse of source text material in attribution practices. Other studies have dealt with the impact of instruction upon students' writing performance. In this case, most findings reveal that explicit writing instruction can actually have a positive impact on students' writing performance. A third line of research has explored the relationship between students' reading comprehension and writing. In this case, the literature offers contradictory results. In some studies, students' reading comprehension and writing have been highly correlated, while in others, they have been weakly correlated. And a fourth line of research has investigated students' perceptions of the joint teaching of reading and writing. In this respect, the results reveal that students' reading and writing behavior and their perceptions of these skills are closely related. The overview of the state of the art reveals the need for more empirical research studies into students' performance on reading to write tasks and their perceptions on the reading-writing linkage, especially in the context of English as a foreign language. In response to this need in research, the purpose of this investigation is to contribute to the understanding of how reading and writing are intertwined in reading to write tasks, a requirement in most second language academic contexts. As to the general objective, it is to explore the relationship between reading and writing in the process of summary writing of English language for students at the Teacher Training College at the National University of Mariela. The specific objectives have been included, but no reference will be made because of time restrictions and because they are also related to the research questions addressed in this study. The research questions are 5, of which 2 of them have been reframed or reworded so as to respond to one of the thesis examination committee members. Research question 1 is, what are the students' perceptions of the interaction between reading and writing? Research question 2, how do the students' perceptions relate to their writing performance? In this second question, the verb correlate has been replaced by the verb relate so as to avoid confusion in the reader since no correlational study was conducted. Research question 3, how does the student's reading of the comprehension of the source text used to write a summary analysis essay affect their written productions? Research question 4, which difficulties do the students report to face when they describe steps taken to write their compositions? This was the second question that was reworded. Instead of using the passive voice, I used the active, and the verb identify was replaced by the verb report. And research question 5, which problems can be identified in students' written productions? These last 2 questions, albeit similar, they differ in terms of the perspectives from which the writing difficulties were analyzed. In research question 4, the emphasis was on the difficulties that students reported to have, whereas in research question 5, the focus was on the difficulties that were identified after analyzing raters' assessment of students' written productions and raters' feedback. As to the theoretical framework, the major themes that served as the theoretical underpinnings were the concept of literacy, second language reading, second language writing, reading-writing relationships, and summary writing. Because time precludes me from conducting an in-depth analysis, I will, in most cases, only mention the concepts, and in other cases, I will elaborate on some ideas. In the case of the concept of literacy, Kern's conceptualization of this notion proved to be a valid and useful framework to analyze the relationship between reading and writing in the context of this thesis. Kern analyzes literacy from 3 dimensions: a linguistic, a cognitive, and a sociocultural perspective. In this thesis, literacy is understood as a lifelong learning process influenced by the context in which students learn how to read and write and the type of texts they write. Regarding second language reading, the reading models analyzed in this investigation were bottom-up models, top-down models, and interactive models of reading. With respect to second language writing, the 2 topics that have been widely discussed are related to second language writing models and what the best approach to second language writing is. Within second language writing models, the ones analyzed in this work were the Hayes Flower model, Hayes' new model, the Hayes' current version of the writing model, Beretta and Scardamalia's writing model. In the case of the approaches to second language writing, the ones selected were the process approach, which views writing as being recursive and interactive, and the genre approach, which defines writing as a practice based on expectations. Within the genre approach, the three traditions are systemic functional linguistics, English for specific purposes, and the new rhetoric. Within the theoretical framework, within writing relationships were included because in this study, the participants were asked to complete an assignment that entails a close connection between reading and writing. This calls for an integrated skills approach to EFL reading and writing. In the context of this thesis, the semi-integrated approach proved to be more suitable, let's say, because the students had to perform a reading to write task, which means that two skills were used in conjunction. Within the theory, I would like to make reference to Eisenhower's reading writing models, which are meant mainly to explain the nature of the reading writing connectedness in terms of the direction of transfer from one skill to the other. I will only refer to the directional model, which was the one applied in this thesis. Within the directional model, reading and writing share structural components, which means that what is learned in one skill can be applied to the other one. This model can take two forms. A reading to write directional model, in which case reading is mainly used as input for writing, and the writing to read directional model, where writing is used or serves to deepen knowledge of reading. As to summary writing, this is one of the reading for writing tasks that most undergraduate students are asked to perform as part of their academic lives. It involves the combination of information from source text material with students' prior knowledge in their attempt to create new meaning in the new text. Spivey captures these contact points between reading and writing by means of a metaphor. She argues that reader writers interweave the selected information from source texts with their previously acquired knowledge, which results in, open quotes, a kind of textual tapestry, end of quotes. In this thesis, the genre chosen is known as summary analysis essays. Learners are expected to include a summary of the source text in the introduction and to choose 2 or 3 ideas to respond to, which are then developed in the body paragraphs of their essays, supported by other source texts. Regarding the methodology, a mixed research design was used, and given that only 4 students participated in this investigation, it can be regarded as a multiple case study. One of the reasons why a correlation study could not be conducted. This study was carried out in the context of a 4-year teacher training program at the National University of Villa Maria during October and November of 2015. Overall, the participants were 6, On the one hand, the 4 students who were taking English language 4 at that time, they actually constituted a natural group, which means that they were students available for the study. They were 2 females and 2 males in their 20s. They were native speakers of Spanish, and they had become students in good standing in English language 3. As to the raters, they were 2 experienced EFL associate professors of English language at the same institution. I have included here a table with the data collection instruments in relation to the research questions that they were meant to address. This is mainly for us to see that the data were triangulated. The instruments were a 5-point Likert scale questionnaire, semi-structured interviews, students' written productions, a reading comprehension test, and students' written reports. With respect to the results and discussion section, it has been organized in terms of the research questions addressed in this study. In order to answer research question 1, what are students' perceptions of the interaction between reading and writing? 2 instruments were employed, the questionnaire and the interviews. The questionnaire consisted of 3 sections. As this table shows, the female participants' range of perspectives were over the mean in the 3 sections, which indicates that for these students, reading and writing are closely related, and their literacy practices tended to strengthen the reading-writing linkage. Lorenzo also got scores over the mean in sections B and C, which reveals that when he approached writing, he connected it with reading. The fact that he achieved a score below the mean in section A suggests that for these students, reading and writing are not interdependent. Michael was the only one who achieved scores below the mean in the 3 sections. It seems that this student did not hold strong beliefs as to the reading-writing linkage, nor was he involved in many literacy practices. Taken together, the outcome of this study is in agreement with previous studies, according to which students' perspectives or views on the reading-writing linkage and their literacy behaviors are related. In fact, in this study, the higher the students' perspectives on the complementary role of reading and writing were, the more they engaged in reading-writing tasks. The data from the questionnaire were triangulated with the interviews. In this case, students made reference to the connectedness between reading and writing, especially in terms of reading as being used as a source of information to develop ideas from, to cite reliable sources, to proofread, and to go over feedback. This is related to cases explanations as to the different writing purposes that reading can serve. It is also in line with Eisenhower's directional model, since for these students, the direction of transfer was from reading to writing. With respect to the second research question, how do the students' perceptions relate to their writing performance? The data derived from 2 instruments, The questionnaire I have already referred to, and students' summary analysis essays. As we can see in this table, the students were asked to write 2 drafts. All of them performed better in their second drafts, but they did not make distinct improvements. And Michael was the only one who got non-passing grades. The analysis of the data indicates the existence of a relationship between students' writing performance and their views on the reading-writing relationships in the extremes. That is to say, in the case of Veronica and Michael. Veronica achieved the high scores in both drafts, and she also had the highest range of perspectives. Michael instead got the lowest scores in the 2 drafts, and his range of perspectives were also the lowest. On the other hand, the comparison of the 2 other participants' scores does not indicate the same relationship. Lorenzo achieved the second high scores in the summary analysis essay, but his range of perspectives ranked 3rd, while Amanda got the third highest range, the 3rd scores in the reading to write task, but her range of perspectives ranked 2nd. With respect to research question 3, how does students' reading comprehension of the source text used to write a summary analysis essay affect their written productions? The data were collated by means of 2 instruments, a reading comprehension test and students' written productions. As this table shows, the reading comprehension test consisted of 2 exercises, a multiple choice exercise and open-ended questions. All of the students outperformed themselves in the open-ended questions, and Michael was the only one who got no passing grades. As figure 4.1 indicates, Lorenzo was a student whose performance was the highest in the 2 activities in the reading comprehension test, followed by Amanda, Veronica, and Michael. The comparison between students' reading comprehension scores and their writing scores shows that Veronica was the only one who achieved a higher score in her second draft, whereas all of the other students performed better in the reading comprehension test. The analysis shows that Veronica's and Michael's performance in the 2 activities overlapped, which shows some evidence of the reading-writing relationship. But it is not the case with Lorenzo and Amanda's scores. In this study, the best readers were not the best writers, a result that is in contradiction with previous published studies, according to which better readers tend to be better writers. A possible explanation is provided by Ascension Delaney, who argues that reading comprehension and writing from sources demand different cognitive processes. The finding to emerge from this study is that learners' reading comprehension may not necessarily be a predictor of writing performance. In relation to research question 4, which difficulties the students report to face when they describe the steps taken to write their compositions? The data were collected by means of two instruments: students' written reports and interviews. I decided to present the results and discussion in this table with the difficulties that the students reported to have, some excerpts as evidence, and reference to the theory or research studies to which such difficulties could be related. Veronica and Michael claim to have problems in terms of the selection of ideas. In this respect, Michael, for example, expressed, "I had difficulties in choosing what ideas to respond to and analyze." This is related to Stevie's selecting operation, according to which students are supposed to select relevant information from source texts so as to create new meaning in their compositions. All of the participants also refer to intertextuality as a challenging endeavor. Lorenzo, for example, expressed, "It is difficult for me to relate the article we summarized to other articles for the responses." This lends further support to Herville and Du's position. These researchers contend that students should be able to use source text material to support their arguments instead of just presenting the information selected from sources. This can also be discussed in the light of Scartamalia and Berette's knowledge transforming model, which involves two domains: the content problem space and the rhetorical problem space. Within this model, writing is supposed to have an impact into writers, especially in terms of their knowledge domain. That is to say, writers gain knowledge of a particular field by writing. This difficulty in terms of intertextuality can also be understood as the students having problems in undertaking Stevie's connecting operation, which entails the integration of source text material and students' prior knowledge. A third difficulty that Michael, Amanda, and Lorenzo reported was related to the rhetorical control aspects. Amanda, for instance, expressed, "I end up making a sort of for and against essay." This finding is in tandem with Sue's investigation, where the participants also expressed to have problems in relation to the rhetorical structure of argumentative essays. Veronica, Michael, and Lorenzo also considered that they needed to improve the content of their compositions. Lorenzo, for example, claimed, "Sometimes the content is not strong. I need to further develop the ideas." This finding is in agreement with previously published studies. And finally, all of the participants referred to language as an area that posed them with some problems. This finding is in line with previous studies as well. In relation to research question 5, which problems can be identified in the students' written productions? The data came from two instruments: the raters' assessments of students' reading productions based on a rating scale, which included three aspects: content, language, and rhetorical control, and the raters' feedback. As this table shows, all of the students improved in each of the categories of the rating scale in their second drafts, except for Veronica and Michael, whose rhetorical control remained the same in both drafts. Veronica's and Amanda's weakest point was content, whereas Lorenzo's and Michael's was language. Michael was the only student, once again, who achieved non-passing grades. The raters' feedback was classified into content, language, and rhetorical control, and counted. The results are similar to the ones in the rating scale, especially with respect to the rhetorical control category, since it was the category in which the students received fewer comments. It was then followed by content and language. It is important to take into account that since the language category encompassed 4 aspects: vocabulary, grammar, register, and mechanics, the raters were more likely to make more comments in this respect. I have also included some excerpts from the raters' comments, but I will try to summarize the findings. In the case of the content aspects, most of the raters' comments were framed in terms of questions like, "What do you mean?" or statements like, "This is unclear." In other cases, they also provided more explanations, or they elaborated on some ideas for the students to actually understand what the problem was, as in these cases. In the case of language, the most recurrent type of mistake was related to vocabulary, followed by grammar, mechanics, and register. As to the rhetorical control aspects, the raters' comments were mainly related to the topic sentences and the conclusion of students' compositions. I would like now to present the conclusion I arrived at after conducting this research. In relation to students' perceptions of the reading-writing linkage, in this student population, the reading-to-write directional model prevailed, especially in relation to how reading can serve writing. This confirms previous findings and contributes to previous research on the multiple uses of reading in writing assignments. In the case of the relationship between students' perspective scores and writing scores, the findings were inconclusive. Such a relationship could only be noticed in the case of Veronica's and Michael's. This study does not confirm the impact that reading comprehension can have on students' reading performance, which is contrary to other previous research findings. This may be due to the fact that reading comprehension and reading to integrate information in writing demand different cognitive processes. The writing difficulties that the students reported to face included intertextuality, selection, organization, and flow of ideas, rhetorical control, content, and language use. This finding is in tandem with previous studies into second language writers' difficulties. The difficulties that the students reported to experience and the ones identified after conducting the analysis of raters' assessments and feedback were similar. The only difference was in terms of citation style, which was an area that the raters identified as being problematic, but which the students did not report as being a challenge. As regards the pedagogical implications, I have added the last three in response to two of the members of the thesis examination committee. One practical application of this study is the need to adopt an integrated skill approach, which is likely to create opportunities for students to actually experience the inevitable interplay between reading and writing. Secondly, teachers should develop their own instructional material in tandem or tailored to their needs and proficiency levels. In line with this, as teachers, we should not assume that learners do not need any explicit explanations about source text writing. This study has shown that even undergraduate students at a higher proficiency level experience writing as a challenging undertaking. Another pedagogical implication is for teachers to ensure that students are ready to perform this type of assignments, not only conceptually, but also linguistically and textually. Otherwise, our students may have the declarative knowledge in terms of what this type of task implies, but they may be unable to transfer such knowledge into practice. Another pedagogical implication is for teachers not to think that students can actually become academically literate by just attending writing workshops, nor can we expect only one subject to be in charge of such an endeavor. In this respect, we should consider the idea of having the language teacher working in collaboration with subject area teachers, an idea that originated in the writing across the curriculum movement. In this way, as Carlino suggests, we would be able, open quote, to promote an epistemic use of writing, end of quote. That is to say, our students would not only be involved in literacy practices, but they would also gain knowledge of a particular field or discipline. And the last pedagogical implication is the need to develop writing centers, especially here in Argentina, so as to provide students with a place for them to be assisted throughout the writing process. With respect to the recommendations for further research directions can be set to study the writing performance and difficulties at other proficiency levels and in other educational institutions, especially for a longer period of time. Future research is also recommended into the writing to read domain, since most studies have focused on the reading to write domain. I have added this last recommendation, thinking mainly in terms of this particular year. Nowadays, we cannot deny the dominance of electronic texts over print-based texts, a situation that has actually impacted on the type of text that we consume. And this calls for a line of research into the multimodal world of reading and writing connections. I would like to end this presentation by sharing a quotation by the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire. The teacher is, of course, an artist, but being an artist does not mean that he or she can make the profile and shape the students. What the educator does in teaching is to make it possible for the students to become themselves. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Paula, por tu presentación. La virtualidad a veces no nos permite expresar nuestra alegría como lo haríamos en la presencialidad a través de un aplauso o un abrazo. Bueno, espero que lo sientas a la distancia. Así que...
Han sido muy cálidos todos, a pesar de esta distancia. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, entonces vamos a continuar con el próximo momento de la defensa, en donde los miembros del jurado van a tener la palabra por una vez y van a hacer una apreciación general o formular las preguntas que ustedes consideren convenientes. Y como les envié en el correo hace un par de semanas, el orden establecido es el siguiente. Primero la doctora Natalia de la Costa, luego la magíster Yamina Gaba, y finalmente el doctor Pablo Requena. Así es que, bueno, les doy la palabra entonces para que comiencen.
Thank you, Florencia. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Paula. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I think the conclusions of your research certainly contribute to our understanding of reading-writing relations. They certainly highlight the relevance of integrating them in reading to write tasks, as you suggest. And also, they show the relevance of this epistemic function of writing, especially in our process of EFL, academic literacy. So I think your study is of great value to the institution where it was carried out, and of course, potentially to other institutions in similar contexts. So congratulations. This is a very interesting topic in general and of particular interest to me, and which I think is sometimes underestimated by students and teachers that teach other courses, I mean, apart from language. So, well, one of the few questions that arose as I was reading your thesis, and I would like to ask out of curiosity, is what was the advantage of asking students to write a take-home essay rather than an in-class essay, given that there might be other variables involved? What was the advantage you saw, or what was the reason why you asked them to write a take-home essay?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your comments. And as to my decision to choose a take-home essay instead of an in-class essay was that this was the second essay that they wrote. I mean, the second summary analysis essay that they wrote. So it would have been unfair for me to analyze an in-class essay since they didn't have enough practice in the genre, something that the students also commented during the interviews. now in English language 4, we make sure that students can practice, have more instances of take-home essays before they actually take part in or asked to write an in-class essay in this genre.
All right, so the fact that they could write at their own pace, let's say, and in a relaxed atmosphere.
That's right, yes, and again, especially because they didn't have enough practice. So I think that the results could have been different. I think that in the thesis, I also included that it would be better to try to analyze students' written productions, as you are suggesting, in the context of an in-class essay. But given the circumstances, I think it was not the most suitable situation.
All right. Also, they were given no further instructions between the first and the second draft. They simply were told to write a second draft.
That's right. Yes, they based their second draft on the teacher's feedback.
All
Yes.
right. All right. Thank you very much. That's all then.
Thank you.
Yamina?
Okay, Paula. So first of all, I would like to say that it was a real pleasure to read your paper. It shows how much you've worked over this topic, all your detailed research that you have done. And well, it was really a pleasure. It was very well written. And yes, and I also, as Natalia said, I think it's a very relevant topic, especially at undergraduate level. Well, reading and writing, it's really so important, especially for language professionals. I think that I don't need to say this among us, that we are all experts in the field. So, and as you said, there is still a lot to research and to find out, and there are contradictory findings. So that's why I think that your work, as I have said in my report, it's of interest, not only at your context, but at other contexts as well. It enriches what has already been done and what will be done in the future. And I was also wondering of the implications of your work, since now we are turning more digital, let's say. I mean, digital text and digital reading and writing was present, but well, now we are kind of forced to move into this modality. And so maybe you will find some new, well, lines of research or implications for your study, right? And that probably you didn't think about this when you were doing your research. So this would be a real challenge. And I also had Natalia's question that, I mean, why the students had to write the essay at home instead of in class, an in-class assignment, but you have already answered it, so there is no need for you to go over it again. I would just probably ask you if you have any, I mean, practical idea to share as to in what ways are you going to change your teaching practice? I mean, in what ways did this thesis change you as a teacher? I mean, more kind of a more personal comment, right? Would you go on teaching in the same way, or would you do things differently? So this is just more like something for you to express in a more relaxed or personal way. So that would be all, but congratulations on your work, right?
Well, thank you very much for your comments. And well, as to my teaching practices, well, some changes have been made in English language 4. We realized that it was impossible for us to demand from our students write very well produced compositions if they do not have enough practice. So what we did was to leave one genre aside so that we can devote the second semester to this genre, summary analysis essays. But I also think that we have made some changes in terms of the feedback that we provide, because I didn't make reference to this in the thesis because it was not the object of study, but more than once, we know that students have like too many comments, so we need to narrow them down, and we also try to have like some personal feedback with our students, because there's some explanations that may not be clear enough. And well, since we have the chance of doing this because we don't have like too many students, so I would say that that was another change that we have implemented.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pablo?
Okay, thank you so much for a very good presentation, and thank you also for such an interesting work. Your thesis shows that you have mastered the ability to do what you're interested in having your students do, which is summarize information, and your background is very exhaustive, and you have a lot of models, and you have been able to summarize that and to use it to explore this topic. I have questions that have to do particularly with this particular methodology, which I haven't used that much, and with respect to how you take a message home after you analyze these 4 individuals. Because it could have implications for what you do next, for what you publish next, sometimes something that we usually try to do is to make sure that teachers do not base their decisions on either their own perceptions or just individual students. So whenever you produce a research study that is based on a very small sample, that's basically a case study, individual students, my interest is, how do you as a researcher now think, okay, what of the results that I obtained, what things can I safely generalize, or at least what are the limitations that I find in my results that could be either because of the small sample size or because of the way that I run the study. And I need to be aware of that, because those results may not even generalize to the whole population within your teaching program, let alone other teaching programs, right? Because we know that in any study, whatever we do, even if we find a strong result in a group of 60 people, that doesn't mean that the 60 people in those groups behaved exactly the same way. There's always variability. So whenever you reduce that to 4 people, I'm just thinking, and you're trying to find these relationships. So what take-home message do you get from this study that you say, okay, my research has shown this, and as a next step, if I would like to check if this is so in other students, this is what I would do. Does that make sense? So do you have any ideas as to what is it that you see clearly in these 4 people, or at least that you see this tension, but that you would like to see if that's actually true beyond these 4 individuals, that we don't know how representative they are of the different cohorts that you keep having, right?
All right. Well, thank you for your comments. And well, as to the limitations of this study, as you were saying, was related to the sample. I mean, it was a multiple case study, so the results cannot be generalized. But because of my experience, which is not as yours, of course, I would say that the difficulties that students reported to have are the ones shared by other students. So the finding that I would say that can be generalized is that in relation to the difficulties that the students have, what it would be interesting to see is whether students at a lower proficiency level have the same difficulties or those difficulties differ. I think there may be some differences in that respect. But within this study, I also had contradictory findings, which means that even in this case of these 4 students, I could not arrive at the conclusion that, for instance, reading comprehension and writing were actually closely related, because that result was only for 2 students. So I think that I should carry out more research into this close relationship to see whether it is related, or perhaps I should add other individuals' variables that I did not consider, yes, because I didn't measure, for instance, the participants' linguistic reservoir, or there were some other issues that were not taken into account.
So if I may push there, because one of the things that tends to happen whenever we continue our research is, like, especially when one of the limitations is the sample size, is that we usually say, with a larger sample size, I fix the problem. But we sometimes jump the thinking process that we have to do, because you have data, even though it's reduced, but you have data that is telling you something. So yes, the checking or the replicating of the results will come from a larger sample size, but there is some thinking there that maybe I can push you now, but if not, you can think later. Like, what could be in your design? Is there anything in my design, what I did with my students, that could have resulted in some students doing one thing and other students doing something else? For example, whenever they do you do their perceptions, right? They all seem to have perceive a relationship between reading and writing, right? But you have a Likert scale, and the minimum is 3 point something, right? So that means you didn't tap onto any student who would select 1.5. So my question there is, would it be because that part of the Likert scale is not likely to get any scores at all in this population? It's like impossible to get, because people who are already in a teaching training program, they wouldn't just mark no relationship at all. So if that's something that you think could be behind the Likert scale use, then you can say, okay, that even if you have a large sample size, but if most of your responses in the perceptions are aligned to one end of the Likert scale, you don't have enough variability within that variable of perception so as to tap on differences. So I'm just saying this because you are in academia, and more likely you are interested in expanding this because you already have the background written, so you can go to conferences, you can present. But it's not just expanding the sample size blindly and doing the same thing with the larger sample size, because the data that you have already can help you think about the method. And if there could, I'm not saying that is the reason, but I'm just saying that is one thing that you could consider, that you did not find in your 4 students anybody who would click on 1 or 2 in the Likert scale, for example. That could be one thing to explore. Why? Is that illogical? Then should I change my Likert scale to try to have more variability? So that could be one thing that just comes to mind. Let me see if I wrote something else here. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
If I can just make a comment in relation to the Likert scale. We know that Likert scales are limited. That's why the data collected by means of that instrument was triangulated with the interviews. I actually conducted the interviews at the end of the study after I had analyzed most of the data. But I'm not saying that, yes, you are right in the sense that, yes, it is a good question I hadn't thought of in terms of why no students actually chose, I don't know, 1 instead of 5 within the Likert scale.
Right, you didn't tap onto a spectrum. And the other thing that I was thinking about is the order of the tasks. Because if students know that this is a study about this particular genre, and you're already asking them questions about whether reading is important to you, how well you read, then they are also aware about this connection. So that could influence their perceptions of what they answer. So those are also other things just to take into account. And especially when you want to generalize beyond these 4 students, which is what usually we try to do. So so if you want to control those things, then those could be some avenues for you to think further about, how did I do things? Could I have pushed my results in one direction or another? Especially because despite having 4 people, you got variation. So you don't know if that's just the typical variation, that if you get 60 participants doing this over 7 years or whatever, then you would still have that variation. But then because you are 60, you would find trends. So that means you don't know if what you found is normal or if what you found is something that that would still be a tension whenever you get a 60. So before you jump into expanding, which is usually what we tend to do, add more, just think about whether you would do things the same way or you would implement any changes, because it's very time consuming, collecting the data, you know, all that. But because you have interest in presenting that. And the last comment, I have two they are smaller things, but they have to do with whenever you present the results, sometimes you made reference to a passing grade. But a passing grade and the rubric for passing or not passing was not one of the measures of your study. It's like an external thing. So it's, I don't want to, this word sounds strong, but it's kind of irrelevant for your study whether the student passed or didn't pass the class. In the sense that I think that whenever you present this or you publish this, I would say something like, and this was the student with the lowest score, right? Because whether he passed or not, that depends on what the instructor of the class, the syllabus, the institution, is completely irrelevant and sometimes not transferable to other institutions, to other things. So you can just reframe the way that you explain, this is the lowest student that performed the poorest, and this is the student that are strongest. Which, by the way, that poor student, maybe it's just, even though they are in 4th year, but maybe there is a spectrum of proficiency there overall in the language. Because he or she, I don't remember who the person was, but okay, and then poor reading score, and then also in the writing. So there could be something else that you're tapping into. Also, with 4 participants, maybe you were lucky to just tap into one that was lower in proficiency, but that could be another measure that you can say, okay, I control for proficiency. Everybody who passed this proficiency will be in this group. And within that, I see differences in how they approach reading or writing. And the other thing would be, I still, whenever you present at a conference or you submit this for publication, I would also think about how you present the problem, because it's very easy to the problem and the implications, so the back ends of your study. It's very easy to just fall on what is the problem overall or the problem for me as a teacher. But when you're presenting this study, you are more of a researcher, right? So you start with the problem that as a teacher you have when teaching this, because that's a hook for your readers, right? To say, hey, I'm also a teacher, but then let me tell you about this study. And when you come to the problem of your study, I think that there it has to be very, very well formulated based on what we know on the previous literature. So for example, if you have already published studies that describe what issues you have, because these students have, right? Because they seem to be clear to you, students have issues with this. That's already part of the problem, right? And you start from there. Students have these issues. I want to test this and that. For example, the idea of the perceptions is something that I didn't find in your statement of the problem. And that was one of the research questions that you have. So, so maybe just making sure that there is consistency in, okay, that's a problem overall. Students have issues with this. But for my study, my problem is that very specific to what you did. Just thinking about whenever you publish. And the implications, also be careful if whenever you present this, especially for a journal article, just think about implications of your results. Because some of the implications could also be thought of without having done your study. Like, for example, as instructors, we shouldn't assume that taking a course on writing will be enough for. That's a very general implication that doesn't necessarily stem from your results, right? What you actually got here. So I would also type that out. Not saying for this, for the present, but I don't have the chance of giving feedback like before you write this, but knowing that you are in academia, that you want to move this forward and present it at conferences and publish it. So I think that it would be a good idea to take into account those things and make them tighter, so that it's stronger. Yeah, what you are saying. But very good job. I don't think I have anything on my notes that is left. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just can I make a comment in relation to the statement of the problem, because it was something that well, you observed in your report, and well, I tried to somehow solve it in the presentation. Perhaps I was not clear enough. I did make reference to to myself conducting a literature review, but within the statement of the problem, I did not want to include it because it was the next slide, let's say, and I didn't want to sound repetitive, but I clearly see what you're aiming at. So thank you very much for the constructive observations.
Yeah, no, Sorry, I interrupted. But for the record, and I did see that you addressed the comments in your presentation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Okay. Bueno, ahora lo que vamos a hacer es lo siguiente. Todos nos vamos a ausentar de la sala, excepto los miembros del jurado. Han recibido el link a la carpeta del Drive que les envié esta mañana, un link a una carpeta donde contienen un esqueleto del dictamen y también los 3 informes que cada uno de ustedes confeccionó para que les sirva para realizar el dictamen. Entonces, todos nos vamos a retirar, ustedes con ese material y acá en reunión van a confeccionar entonces el dictamen final, y una vez que esté terminado, me parece, Nati, vos tenés mi ¿no?
Sí,
Eso, alguno me envía un WhatsApp y yo me comunico entonces con el resto de las personas que están presentes ahora, así nos reunimos nuevamente acá para la lectura del dictamen.
Muchas gracias.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Quedamos a la espera entonces del mensaje.
Así es.
Bueno,
saludos.
Hasta luego. Tenés que cortar la grabación, Flor. Así.
Esa es la pregunta.
Ahora ya nomás le corto.